take a look at your screen to show you what we have for tonight. Tonight we have a choice of either a woman's fragrance or a men's fragrance. So thank you very much, Esther and Albert Caragilia. Last sponsor for tonight is Joy Betan in memory of Shalom Dovber ben Dvora Ruth. May he have a Aliyat Neshama Bezrat Hashem. Amen. Thank you, everybody. And now we're going to continue with the class. Again, very, very much heartfelt appreciation to everybody who are sponsoring and donating towards the classes to continue. Really, really appreciate it. Our organization appreciates it tremendously to be able to keep on providing all of this Torah worldwide. And of course, for those of you who are live, that's the most important. Okay, this week we are studying Parashat Bamidbar. Now, Bamidbar, as we should know, by now, when speaking to a very high level people, it is the beginning of the fourth book of Moses. The beginning of the fourth book of Moses, we had Bereshit, Genesis, we had Shemot, Exodus, Leviticus, Vayikra, and now we are in the fourth book, and that is Bamidbar, as translated in English is Numbers, which we'll address in a moment. Just as a basic introduction, the book of Bamidbar recounts the occurrences that the Jewish people had during their traveling of 40 years during the wilderness. Now, I want to share with you a beautiful interpretation, or as an introduction, that Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch gives in his introduction to the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. He says that if we look at the book of Exodus primarily, of course, we have the exodus of the Jewish people from Egypt, but then we have the building of the Mishkan, the building of the tabernacle. That's how the book ends off. The book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, discusses the service in the tabernacle by the Kohanim, by the Leviim, and all of the sacrifices that any Jew would bring to the temple. Now, in Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, what happens is we go back to discussing the national reality of the Jewish people. It shows us who Bnei Israel, the Jewish people, really are. And with its opening command of taking a census, counting each and every one of the Jews, is not taken, we should not take for granted. Rather, the Jews are counted for the first time as an Edah. Edah is a community. It's a whole unit. It's a unified body of people, all that have the same common calling, as Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch puts it. All counted independently to show and to exemplify the importance of each and every person, yet also counted as a whole to show each person that they are part of something much greater. They are part of the Jewish nation. The book of Leviticus ends with the laws of counting one's livestock and tithing it. And the beginning of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, speaks about God counting his flock, so to say, all of his Jewish people that he loves so dearly. So kind of getting to the translation, again, this is as a last part of introduction before we get into the Zera Shimshon. The word Bamidbar, to all of us who understand the Hebrew language, does not mean numbers. Numbers means mispar, misparim. Bamidbar means in the wilderness, in the desert. So what's the reason for the difference of translation? And the reason is because the very first episode, the very first topic in the book of Bamidbar is the numbers, is the counting of each and every one of the tribes of Israel. And that's why it was translated as numbers. I don't think that was done by, great Torah scholars. It could be it was translated that way from the, the great Bible. However, whoever was important, whoever put Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus, I guess they also put numbers. But that's why it's called Numbers. Moving on to the Zera Shimshon. Now, the Zera Shimshon addresses our first verse. I'm going to share with you the first verse of this week's Torah portion. This is Numbers 1:1. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe Bamidbar Sinai. באוהל מועד באחד לחודש השני בשנה השביעית לצאתם מארץ מצרים לאמור. It says, the Lord spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert, in the tent of meeting, on the first day of the second month, so that would be the first day of the month of Iyar, in the second year after the exodus from the land of Egypt, saying. And then the following verse, I don't have on the screen, tells us, God tells Moses to go and to count each and every tribe individually. So, based on this calculation, the Jewish people left in the year 2448. So they left. The year after is the year 2449. So the first of the year in the year 2449 is when God tells Moses to do the following. And the following was, as we just mentioned, to count the Jewish people. Now the Zera Shimshon quotes a midrash. It's a very interesting midrash. The midrash says that at the time of Matan Torah, at the time when the Jewish people received the Torah, which it's actually beautiful, it always falls out that Bamidbar, this week's Torah portion, always falls out the Shabbat right before the great holiday of Shavuot, when we commemorate and celebrate our receiving of the Torah as the Jewish nation. So always the Divrei Torah, the Torah novelties always fit in with that theme, interestingly enough, specifically though. So the Midrash says that the Zera Shimshon brings that the nations of the world were very jealous. They said, why is it that the Jewish people are the ones to receive the Torah? Why did they get the Torah over us? To which the Midrash continues and explains that God silences them and says, go bring your books of lineage and genealogy, because I have the books of lineage of the Jews. And this is why the Midrash ends off. This is why that at the beginning of this book of Numbers, which follows right after the end of last week's Torah portion, take a look at your screen. The end of last week's Torah portion says, which is actually the end of the book of Leviticus, Ele ha-mitzvot. This is Leviticus 27:34. Ele ha-mitzvot asher tziva Adonai et Moshe el bnei Israel behar Sinai. These are the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses to tell the children of Israel on Mount Sinai. This, explains the Midrash, comes right before it ends the book of Leviticus, and then right next is starting the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, to tell us that it is because that the Jewish people stood at Mount Sinai, received the Torah, because they committed themselves to the mitzvot and the Torah in merit of their ancestors, in merit of their lineage, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That is why they are the ones who receive the Torah over the rest of the nations. That's how the Zera Shimshon, that's what the Midrash says. Now to that, before I bring the Zera Shimshon's questions, I want to share another Midrash with you. The Midrash, it's a famous one. The Midrash tells us that God actually knew that the nations were going to be complaining about the fact that they did not receive the Torah. So God, he had one up on them. He came to them and he offered them the Torah before he even offered the Jewish people the Torah. He went to each of the main nations and they rejected it. Take a look at your screen. God goes to, give me a moment over here. God first goes to Ishmael and he tells Ishmael, would you like to receive the Torah? So, you know what Ishmael does? Sorry, Esav. I'm going to go in the order of the Midrash. God goes to Esav and he asks Esav, would you like to receive the Torah? Well, Esav, as anyone normally would, if you want to sell something to someone, if you want to give something to someone, they first ask, what's in it? So Esav asks God, well, what's in the Torah? Look what God answers. God answers as follows. We know the sixth commandment says, Lo tirtzach. That's in Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. You shall not murder. You know what Esav says? Esav says, I can't do that. Look at Esav's blessing he received from his father Yitzchak. Ve'al charbecha tichyeh. This is in Genesis chapter 27, verse 40. And you shall live by your sword. He was a person who killed people, who murdered people all the time. And therefore, he said, I don't want the Torah. So the first, God goes to Esav, and Esav says, I've not taken the Torah. Okay. Next. God then goes to Ammon and Moab, and I'll explain who they are in a moment. He goes to Ammon and Moab and he says, would your nation like to receive the Torah? So they ask the same question as Esav did, and they say, well, what is written in the Torah? Take a look what God answers. God answers, Lo tin'af, you shall not commit adultery. That's in the same verse. That is the 7th commandment of the 10 commandments. You cannot commit adultery. They said, well, that doesn't make any sense to us because we thrive on immorality and adultery. That's who we are. How do we know that? Taking us back to chapter 19 in Genesis, as you see on your screens, there was a very interesting episode, and this was when the angels came to rescue Lot, his family, out of the city of Sodom. This has taken us quite a while back. Those of you remember, good. Those of you don't, it's not too bad. Because what happens is when Lot is exiting with his wife and 2 daughters, his wife turns around, turns to pillar of salt. To them, Lot and then his 2 daughters are escaping. They're being escorted by the angels, and then they're left on their own. To them, they realize that the whole city of Sodom has been destroyed. The daughters thought that the world was destroyed. Now, they made a simple calculation. If the whole world is destroyed, and all there is our father and two girls, they said, well, we need to reproduce the world. So what they did was they committed incest, and they got their father drunk, and they had relations with their father in order that they should become pregnant. Look at your screen. It says that the elder one, this is in verse 37, Vateled Bechira, the elder one gave birth to a boy from that act of incest. Vatikra Shemo Moav, that was his name, and he was the head of the whole tribe of Moav until today. The other daughter, the second daughter, the younger one, Vetzira Gamhi Alda Ben, she also gave birth to a boy. She called him Ben Ami, and he is the father of all of the children of Ammon until today. In other words, the Midrash is telling us that Ammon and Moab also rejected the Torah because they themselves thrive, and their fuel, so to say, is immorality. Okay. Then God goes to Ishmael, as the Midrash recounts, and he asks Ishmael, would you like to receive the Torah? So you know what Ishmael says, what's written in it? God answers, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 11, it says, Lo tignovu, you're not allowed to steal. Esav says, that doesn't work for me. That doesn't jive with my lifestyle, because the blessing that I got from my father was, Vuye pere Adam. He's going to be a wild donkey of a man. Yado bakol v'yad kolbo. His hand will be upon all, and everyone's hand will be upon him. His hand will be upon all, explains the Midrash, that Ishmael could not hold himself back from stealing. It was part of his way of life. And therefore, what happens is he also rejects it. At this point, God went to the main other nations. They all rejected. Okay, he turned to the Jewish people. He turned to the Jewish people and he did something different. He didn't offer them the Torah at first. He kind of forced them into it, as we'll explain in a moment. And then they answered, as we all know, the famous Naaseh v'nishma. Yes, take a look at your screen. Naaseh v'nishma is in Exodus chapter 24, verse 7, as it says over here, Naaseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear, which are very powerful, powerful words. Now, there's a joke as an addendum to this midrash, because if we pay attention, God offered the Torah to the rest of the nations. He didn't really offer it to the Jews. He kind of, again, forced it upon us, as I'll explain in a moment. Can we imagine what would be if God would have offered the Jewish people the Torah? And what if the Jewish people would have asked God, what's written in the Torah? So if we look at the rest of the nations, God answered specifically. He didn't say, thou shalt not steal to Esav, because Esav didn't have a stealing problem. His problem was a murdering problem. He told each of the nations what it says in the Torah that specifically pertains to them that they cannot hold themselves back from. So again, I'm making a statement that this is a joke. The Midrash doesn't say this, okay? What would be if God would have come to the Jewish people and told them, I offer you the Torah, would you like to take it? And then the Jewish people would have said, well, what's written in it? What would God have said that would be the hardest thing for the Jewish people to handle? So, should I give a chance to anybody? Let's see if someone raises their hand. Okay, if you raise your hand. Okay, number 1, Yasmin.
Complaining.
Hey, very good. Have you heard me say that joke before?
In the Zera Shimshon and one of them, you said that.
Very good, very good. Okay, so the funny joke would be that God would say, "Thou shalt not kvetch," or "Thou shalt not complain," and then the Jewish people would have automatically said, "Okay, we can't take the Torah." Thank God, complaining is not one of the 613 commandments, or else we'd be in a lot of trouble. Okay, reeling back to the Zera Shimshon. The Zera Shimshon has 3 questions on our first midrash, the midrash of the other nations coming to God and being jealous and claiming, why did the Jewish people receive the Torah? So listen to what the Zera Shimshon asks. Number 1, he says, the nations of the nations of the world didn't even want the Torah. We just explained a moment ago. He went to each of them, he offered it them, and they said no. That's number 1. Number 2 is, why did God have to silence them? Normally when you silence somebody, it's like something very serious going on. Or you want to prove a strong point. So why did God have to silence the other nations? And the third is, how does God answer the nations' claim of why did the Jews get it by saying, go bring me your books of lineage? How does that answer their question, asks the Zera Shimshon. So all 3 of these answers are answered by a theme, and the Zera Shimshon gives 2 separate answers to answer it. I think they're both beautiful, and we're going to learn some practical lessons from each of them. The first answer he gives is based on the Talmud in the beginning of Masechet, of Tractate Avodah Zarah. Right at the beginning of the tractate of that Masechet, the Talmud tells us about what's going to be in the time of Mashiach. How are the other nations going to react to the coming of Mashiach? So the Talmud says each of them are going to come and they're all going to claim their reward. They're going to claim that they did everything that they did for the sake of the Jews and the sake of Torah, which we all know is not true. They're going to say, we built great things, we created great things, we did all the good for the Jews and the Torah, and we know that's all not true. And God gives them a test with the sukkah, they leave, they kick it out. Another time we'll speak about that. However, what the Zera Shimshon does say is that the other nations come with a claim, and this is a strong claim. We did pay attention to this a moment ago. The other nations come and say, hey, you only offered us the Torah, you forced it upon the Jews. You raised the mountain when they stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, when they started getting cold feet and they were scared, and you lifted it above them and you were about to drop it on them if they wouldn't accept the Torah. So how do you say that the Jews were the ones who accepted the Torah, lived the life of Torah? You forced it upon them. So you know what God answers? God says, you fools. You couldn't even observe the 7 Noahide laws, which every Gentile is obligated to fulfill. Just to jog our memory, let's look at what the 7 Noahide laws are. Take a look at your screen, which, by the way, are part of our 613. So number 1 is, do not profane God's oneness in any way. In other words, a Noahide, a Gentile, has to believe in God and no other deity at all. Number 2, that a Noahide is not allowed to curse our Creator, God, or mention God's name in vain, included in that. Do not murder, number 3. Sexual morality is an obligation even for a Noahide, for a Gentile. They're not allowed to steal. Well, again, all of these apply to us Jews as well. They have an obligation to establish courts of law to ensure justice in the world. And number 7 is that they're not allowed to eat a limb from a living animal similar to us. We not only can't eat a living limb from an animal, but we need to slaughter the animal before consuming it. But these are the 7 Noahide laws. So God comes back to all the other nations and says, "You guys want 613? You couldn't even observe the 7 simple ones compared to all the intricate of the rest of them. What are you going to say to that?" So you know what the nations of the world tell God? They say, "Do you think the Jews kept them? They didn't keep them either. Especially when they were in Egypt, they were idolatrous. They didn't even keep those main 7. So, very good. Then you went on and you forced them to accept the Torah. That doesn't show any greatness on their part," explains the Talmud, that the nations come and claim to God. And right there and then, the Zera Shimshon explains the Midrash, God stops them. He silenced them. He shuts them up and says, "Bring me your lineage. I want to see exactly where you come from, because you know what? You are a Noahide, but the Jews are not Noahides. They are Bnei Israel. They are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're very different. They were Jews. They were the sons, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, even in Egypt. And the proof to that is that already our patriarchs were commanded more than just the 7. It was all through prophecy. It wasn't a national revelation the way it was by Matan Torah, by Mount Sinai, the receiving the Sinai revelation. No, it wasn't. But they were still commanded the 7 Noahide laws plus. I'm going to share with you very briefly. I didn't find it translated, but I'm going to show you what the Rambam says in chapter 9 of Hilchot Melachim. I'm going to paraphrase it. He says here that 6. If you see on your screen, this is Maimonides, Laws of Kings, chapter 9, halacha 1. It says that there were 6 laws that were given to Adam, and we mentioned all of them. The only one that he wasn't given was that of not eating from an animal that's alive, because he wasn't allowed to eat meat anyway, so that didn't apply to him. Okay. Next is that so that last 7th one was given to Noah, when Noah was allowed, when he came out of the ark to eat animals. He was also commanded that he shouldn't eat from a live animal. That's the 7. Then he says that Abraham was given the obligation of circumcision and also praying shacharit, the morning prayer. Isaac was given the extra mitzvah of a commandment of tithing, taking off maaser, and praying mincha. Jacob was given the gid hanasheh, the prohibition of eating from the sciatic nerve, and also prayed arvit, the evening prayer. And in Egypt, they were commanded through Amram, which was Moses' very own father, multiple other mitzvot, along with Shabbat, as we know they observed, and other different and special ones, until Moses came. So there were unique ones until Moses came, and through him the whole Torah was given. So the Zera Shimshon says it is obvious that the Jewish people are not Bnei Noach. Even when they were in Egypt, they were already considered Bnei, the children of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So what about the claim of the nations? They didn't keep the Torah. We know that they sunk to the lowest place, the 49th level of impurity. So the truth is, as Zera Shimshon explains, is there were always some that were still committed to a Torah lifestyle. Whether it would be only the tribe of Levi or even some other individuals, there were some. As the Talmud says in Masechet Sanhedrin, page 111a, that even if there's one righteous person in one city, the whole city can be saved on his account, as we learn by what Abraham did for Lot, as we mentioned earlier on, to try to save the city of Sodom. But the city of Sodom was so low, and Lot wasn't even a real native, so God just said, let's take Lot out. And Lot wasn't even such a tzaddik, such a righteous person either way. He was saved in merit of Abraham. One more thing the Zera Shimshon adds on this point is he says that even the Jews who did not fulfill the Torah when they lived in Egypt, and again, their main issue was idolatry and immorality, they still had as we say in Hebrew, a din shogeg. it was something that was not intentional. They didn't sin intentionally. And because they are Jews, they were able to repent for that. Opposed to a Gentile who doesn't ever have this concept of a din shogeg, that it was an unintentional sin. Because they only have 7. As the Zera Shimshon explains. Each and every Gentile needs to know those 7 mitzvot very clear to make sure that they do not make a mistake in them. A Gentile can't steal something and claim, oh, I didn't know I wasn't allowed to steal. A Gentile cannot commit adultery and claim, oh, I didn't know that was not permitted. Very, very different. A Jew's not allowed to either, but a Jew at least has hope. They have a path to teshuvah, to repentance, which is something specific to Bnei Israel, to the Jewish people. Now, having said that, the Zera Shimshon now gives his first answer, that the Jewish people received or were forced to receive the Torah because of their lineage. And that is what God was doing. God said, you Gentiles, you nations of the world, bring me your lineage. You're Bnei Noach. You're not even fulfilling the 7 mitzvot. They are receiving the Torah. They're even being forced to receive the Torah out of merit of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's doings. Okay, that's his first answer. He gives an alternative answer that I'm going to share with you, and then we're going to bring a powerful lesson. The alternative answer is as follows. You know what the Gentiles' claims were? You know what the nations came to God saying when the Jewish people were going to receive the Torah? They said that the Jewish people, they weren't sincere when they received the Torah. Yeah, they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and then we will listen. But really, they didn't do it with altruistic motives. They did it because they were in a down and low place. They were the slaves of Egypt. They were entrenched in impurity. They didn't have a great life for themselves. They were at the bottom. They said it can't get any worse, so we might as well go and take a chance with this God that's coming in and revealing himself to us. That's what they said. They said they're doing it for their honor, for their own personal benefits. And that doesn't give them any right and doesn't really make them great at all, explains the nations. They come and they prove it. The Zera Shimshon shows us. Do you know what they come and they do? Take a look at your screen. They said the Jewish people are really small. They're considered as small, as the younger ones. Look how Rivka refers to her son. It says, and Rivka takes the garments of Esav, her elder son, brings him to the house and dresses Yaakov bena hakatan. She dresses Jacob, her younger son. He's a small one, Katan, he's a small guy, he's a nobody. It says in Amos in 2 places, in chapter 7, verse 2 and verse 5, it says, Yaakov ki katon hu. Again here, Yaakov ki katon hu, Jacob, for he is small. The nations are saying, Jacob's small. He's a nobody. There's no hope for him. Forget it. Okay. They didn't really do it because they're great. They're small and unworthy. So to that, God answers, no. The Jewish people really accepted the Torah because the Torah belonged to them because of their lineage. They didn't accept it for honor. They didn't accept it for personal benefit, as you're trying to claim. To the contrary, the reason why the Jewish people accepted the Torah was because they're the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they deserve that merit. And he says, look closely, and this is how Zera Shimshon answers, look closely at your lineage. What did your father do? Esav, he sold the firstborn. He sold the birthright, rights to the firstborn, to the younger son, to Jacob. He didn't even want it. So Jacob is really the greater of the two. And Jacob is not the small one. He may be younger, but he's not the small one. He is a great one. Don't assume that Bnei Israel accepted it for their benefit. Rather, they were genuine when they accepted and they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and then we will listen. Unlike the Gentiles, how we mentioned previously, that they rejected the Torah. The Jews really came and they accepted it with all of their proper intentions. And that's how the Zera Shimshon gives us an alternative answer why God silenced them for their ridiculous claim and told them, bring us your books of lineage, because the book of lineage of the Jewish people shows that they truly deserve the Torah in merit of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So two similar answers getting to the same point. Listen to this lesson I wanted to bring from it. I think it's a powerful lesson. It's one that we should all know, and it's going to segue me into the next topic, which I think is very important that all of us are listening to tonight. The lesson is as follows. There is a fundamental difference between a Jew and a Gentile. It doesn't mean that one is greater than the other. Yes, let's be open about it. The Torah does call the Jewish people Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, the chosen nation. Yes, but with that being chosen comes a great responsibility. With that, as I normally quote, in the name of Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And so it is. The Jewish people, we have 613 responsibilities with thousands of derivatives that we have towards our Creator. We have 248 positive ones. We have 365 negative ones. That is a responsibility. It's a privilege, but it's a responsibility. The nations of the world, they have 7. And in their own way, if they do those 7 perfectly, they fulfilled their purpose. As a Jew, we have a lot more to do to fulfill our purpose and our mission in life, and to do right with our God. So therefore, we have to understand there is a fundamental difference, and that difference is rooted in our lineage. It's rooted in our parents, grandparents, all the way taking us back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not just Abraham, who had 2 sons, and not just Isaac, who had 2 sons. It takes us to Jacob. Once we are traced back all the way to Jacob, to Bnei Yisrael. Yisrael was Jacob's other name. That is what gives us this right of Torah and of the responsibilities. It truly lies in our genuine commitment to our Torah. So that is the difference between a Gentile and a Jew. And this leads me to my next topic. This next topic may be not directly related to this week's Torah portion, but in essence it is. And that is, right after we just discussed that God rightfully so gave the Jewish people Bamidbar in the wilderness, Behar Sinai on Mount Sinai, the Torah, it says to go and count each and every Jew, each and every tribe. And the way of the counting was by one's tribe, one's father. Based on who your father was, which tribe your father came from, decided on which tribe you belonged to. So if for argument's sake, your father was from the tribe of Reuben and your mother was from the tribe of Shimon, of Simon, you, as the child, would be part of the tribe of Reuben because that is where your father originated from. You follow your father's lineage in that respect. Comes the great question, as we know. The Jewish religion is transmitted and passed on by our mothers through our women, better known as, we consider Judaism through matrilineal descent. And for that reason, we have to understand, why is that? Why is it? 2 questions. Number 1 is, why is Judaism through matrilineal descent? And number two, why is it that when it comes to prescribing lineage, to prescribing to a person to their tribe, then they go by the father? And don't say because it needs to be fair game, one to the mother, one to the father, as we would all know that the mother one is way more important, right? It does matter which tribe you're part of, but what matters most is that, are you Jewish or not? So listen to the answer. The answer is really brought in Masechet Kiddushin, page 66b, as well as 68b. It's brought in the Maimonides. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch, and it also stems from a verse in our Torah along with Rashi's interpretation. Take a look at the beginning of chapter 7 in the book of Deuteronomy. Tells us when the Jewish people are going to enter the land of Israel, where God promised them, you're going to have to remove all of the nations, cast away the nations that are there, all 7 of the nations. Next verse says that God is going to give them, He's going to deliver them in front of you, you will smite them, you will destroy them, you will beat them. And then it says, Lo tichrot lahem berit velo titchanem. Don't make any treaty or covenant with them. Don't be gracious to them. Rather, Destroy them. Rid them from the land. Okay. Next verse. This is an important verse. The Torah tells us, "Velo titchaten bam." Do not intermarry with them. Lo bitecha lo titen livno. You shall not give your daughter to his son, and uvito lo tikach livnecha. And don't take his daughter for your son. Don't intermarry in any way possible. Not your boys and not your daughters in any way at all. The next verse is the key to why Judaism goes based on matrilineal descent. This is a very important fact that many don't even know about. It is a little intricate, so get ready for this. It says over here, Ki yasir et bincha, for he will turn away your son. What's the problem? When your son, as we're soon going to explain, this is really your grandson, okay? Hold on for a moment. When your grandson is going to when your son is going to marry a Gentile woman, the son that they give birth to, which is your grandson, will turn away from you and not follow God, and he will serve the other nations of the other gods, and that will get God very angry. You see, ki asiret bincha, your son who will marry a Gentile woman, the children, the son that is born from that relationship will turn away from the Torah, and they will start turning to the other gods of the nations, to idolatry. How do I know this? This is Rashi over here. Rashi explains this, and I'm gonna read through it just for us to understand, because this is the very strong source of why Judaism goes on based on matrilineal descent. Beno shel goy sheisat bitcha yasir et bincha asher teled lo bitecha me'acharai. What's going to happen, like I explained, is your son is going to marry a Gentile woman, and then that Gentile woman, along with her family. Remember, when you marry a person, you marry their family. Very important. Look into the family before you marry somebody. And therefore, that woman is going to raise that child based on how she was raised. And she's going to take that child and turn him away from God and from the Torah. Limadnu sheben bitecha haba min hagoy karui bincha. We learn from here that a person's grandson is considered their son, right? All grandparents consider their grandchildren as their own children. They love them like their own children, sometimes even more than their own children. Aval ben bincha haba min hagoya eno karui bincha ela bena. However, a son that comes from your son who was married to a Gentile is not called your son, it's called her son. Shahare, because the verse did not say al bito lo tikach ki tasiret bincha macharai, rather bincha, when your son is taken and marries a Gentile, that's when there's going to be a problem of turning away. In other words, because that may be a little intricate in the depth of the text and of Rashi, but in other words, the Torah goes out to warn against intermarriage specifically for our son's son, meaning for our son who would, God forbid, marry a Gentile woman, that grandson, the son of your son, whose mother is a Gentile, that is where the main warning of intermarriage is prescribed in the Torah. Yes, it's prohibited in every single way, but the warning is specified specifically for the son of your son, who your son married, when your son married a Gentile woman. That is why, so that's to answer our first question. Why is Judaism based on matrilineal descent? Well, that's the answer. Okay. Very good. So if we are putting so much importance on Judaism being transmitted through the mother, why is not all lineage transmitted through the mother? Why can't we say that the mother's tribe is where the children belong? Why is it that the father's tribe? So this the Zera Shimshon explains. And he explains based on a Talmud that says that a peaceful individual proves their pure lineage. Someone who is peaceful, someone who's a noble individual, that means that they have pure lineage. The Zera Shimshon says an amazing thing. Listen to this. I couldn't say it if he didn't say it. He says that test of lineage is specifically on men. He says that women are nice. right? We all know a lot of nice women, right? We only know nice women. Women are nice. Women don't have this problem of not being being unpeaceful. All women are peaceful, explains the Zera Shimshon. Women are normally, as King David says, Kol kvoda bat melech penima. He says the reason is because women are normally at home, tending to the kids. More simple than out and about and hustle and bustle. And therefore, explains the Zera Shimshon, lineage goes based on the father. A person's tribal connection belongs and goes based on a person's father's tribe. Because lineage depends on the man's test to see if they could be peaceful and have that pure lineage. So as a summary for this segment, we are of matrilineal descent because of the way the Torah warns intermarriage, and we explain that. However, lineage and tribal association goes based on one's father, because that will be a true test to the pure lineage or not. Moving on to the next part of the Zera Shimshon, and I think we're all going to enjoy this part very, very much, because when it comes to when a person thinks of a flag, we normally think of a flag of a very secular, nationalistic symbol, right? Every country has a flag. But somehow, listen to this is quite interesting. Somehow, flags creeped its way into our Torah, and there's a whole to-do about the flags. Every tribe has their own flag, with a symbol on the flag and a color of the flag, and those colors represent the gems that were on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest. So what are these flags actually doing, creeping into our Torah and finding a threshold? Is there something much deeper to a flag than maybe we're overlooking? Is there a lesson that we ought to know that the Torah put it into our, that God put into our Torah deliberately? So, the answer is as follows. Flags really come from a midrash that the Zera Shimshon quotes that says when God came down to give the Torah to the Jewish people, many celestial beings and legions came down along to see this one and only Sinai revelation. And the Jews, the midrash explains, peeked up into the sky and saw all of these legions, all these celestial beings with flags. And the Jews, the midrash says, looked at those flags and said, we want flags as well. And Hashem said, okay. Hashem promised that they will have flags also. Now comes a year and 2 weeks later, when the Jews are being counted, and then they're being set up into their tribes, and they have their tribal leader, their nasi, their prince. They're also given flags. Why flags? Well, because God promised to them, because they saw it. So here's a series of questions. Number one, flags are physical. What does that mean that celestial beings, legions of celestial beings, are coming down with flags? That's number one, right? Number two, angels needing a flag. Like, are there different countries in angel land? Are there different, different associations? A reason that an angel needs a flag? That's number two. And number three, I still don't understand why the Jews would want flags. Is it just to be like the angels? But Jews, human beings, are not like angels. So listen to how the Zera Shimshon answers in a beautiful way. I'm also adding a little bit of an analogy from Rabbi Yisachar Friend, who brings a similar answer in the name of the Netivot Shalom, but I think it's a very, very powerful answer. The answer is that flags represent a group of people who all have the same mission. They're a group of people who operate for at least a similar, if not the exact same mission. And he gives an example. Look at the US military, okay? Not only does every branch have its own flag, and by the way, it's the same in the Israeli army as well, But in many cases, every unit and subunit will amend the flag of their branch to represent their specific unit. It's a person's ID. It's a person's identification. The SEALs who operate under the Navy, they have their own Navy SEALs flag. And the reason for this is because that's what defines their mission, their purpose, what they're there to do. So the angels come along and they have flags. What does that mean? Flags are something physical? No, but flags mean that they each had a specific mission. And it was so obvious what their mission was. The Jews saw that and they wanted that. The flag means a purpose. They saw that all these angels had a purpose. They wanted a purpose as well. They said, we want nothing but that. Flags teach us not only who we are, but what we're doing, what our defining mission can be in order to achieve greatness. And that is something the Jews wanted so badly. They were craving it. The Zera Shimshon explains that angels work in unison. The Jewish people wanted that. They wanted peace. Can you imagine being a slave for so long? There's nothing more you want than peace and tranquility. When they saw that, when they peeked up into the sky and they saw the angels with flags in unison in peace, they wanted that. The Zera Shimshon says, why is peace so important? Because when a person has peace with their peers, with themselves, with their God, with their family, with their friends and their neighbors, then no harm can come their way. He brings a proof from Bilam. We're going to read about him soon. It's coming up. It's one of my favorite Torah portions. Bilam the sorcerer, Moses' nemesis. Take a look at what the Torah tells us about Bilam. It says over here, Vaisa Bilam et einav. Bilam raises his eyes. He's trying to curse the Jewish people. Vayaret Israel. He sees them. Shochen lishvatav. Dwelling according to its tribes. Vati alav ruach Elohim. And instead of cursing them, he came to bless them. What does that mean? Shochen lishvatav. The Midrash explains they were dwelling according to its tribes. Each and every Jew had their own tent. And every tent was in its specific tribal quadrant. And each tribe lived in peace. The whole Jewish nation was in unison. They were united, explains the Zera Shimshon. Because of that, Bilam had no power to curse them. Bilam, the Midrash answers, oh, who can even harm these people? It's impossible to harm them because they have shalom, they have peace. Flag is something that unifies a tribe. It unifies them through its definition, through its mission of each and every tribe. We know that every tribe had a specific mission. One tribe was there to go do business, Zivulun. Another tribe had to host the temple. Another tribe was servicing the temple. Another tribe was Issachar was just studying Torah. Every single tribe had their specific mission. The flag defined them. You know what the Zera Shimshon says? That the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, feeds off of confusion. When there's confusion, it's so easy to trick someone to do something that, rationally speaking, they would have never and should have never done. The Zera Shimshon explains peace is the vessel that holds blessing. Without peace, there is no blessing. And therefore, when there is peace, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, can't confuse and can't harm. And that is the great lesson of how flags made their way into our Torah. Flags is something important. It's not for those of us living in America, red, blue, and white. It's way more than that. It's supposed to represent something very special. Lesson of the flags is brought out the individualism of each and every tribe and those that are part of it. When we're aware and we're focused of what that is, what each person's respective and unique role is, then there's no room for strife and confusion. There will be peace. A flag is something that represents that. A flag is something that teaches us that. And I'll end off with a famous saying, and then I'll open up. I see there was a couple hands and a couple questions I was texted in. I know we spoke about a lot of different important things. But there's a famous saying that says, good fences make good neighbors. And that is so true. It's so important to be open and loving and to invite people and to go to people. But a proper fence, not just a physical one, but fences that we create in our lives, boundaries that we create in our lives, does make and promote good friends and good neighbors. Let that lesson of the flag resonate with us, not just as a patriotic symbol or a nationalistic agenda, but to the contrary, to something which defines a person's unique role and mission. And when we know our unique mission and role and what our calling is, then that gives us the greatest sense of peace and the greatest sense of a lack of confusion. Confusion is one of the hardest things. I'll end off something else that came to my mind. When a person commits himself to learning Torah, one of the hardest things is learning Torah and not understanding what you're learning. Why? Because it causes more confusion. We want to know it clear. We want to know what the Torah says in a clear way. We want to know what the halacha, what the Jewish law is clearly. But that's not the way of Torah. The way of Torah is toiling to understand it, toiling to grow in it. The hardest type of study is really the Talmud, because whenever someone learns Talmud, unless you have a very crystal clear mind and you're holding cup, you're holding back and forth what's going on, every question, every proof, every answer, disproof, who's saying what, where are they from, it's very confusing. Many people who learn Talmud, if they don't go slow and learn it with the proper method, are left behind with something confusing. That's something which doesn't make a person feel good. The Torah is open to all, but the Torah has to be toiled in order to understand it, in order to grow from it, in order to find peace in it. And therefore, my blessing to us all, in memory of the Zera Shimshon, is to really, really, really pray to God to find our mission, to show us our flag and help us follow it. That's something that the Jewish people yearned when they saw it in the angels. It's something God promised and gave them. It's something that we need to introduce into our lives. What flag do you wave? And there's much to talk about that, but we'll end it over here.